The Nevada desert stretched endlessly under the merciless August sun of 1876, its barren landscape broken only by the occasional scrub brush and the rutted trail that led to Copper Canyon. The abandoned trading post stood like a weathered sentinel. At the canyon's entrance, its windows dark and empty, its wooden frame bleached nearly white by years of relentless sun. It was in this desolate place that Rebecca Montgomery found herself alone, with nothing but a weathered trunk of belongings, $3 to her name, and a deed to a property no one wanted. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rebecca wiped the sweat from her brow, her black morning dress, absorbing the punishing heat as she stared at the dilapidated building that was now her only possession in the world. The stagecoach that had reluctantly dropped her at this remote location had disappeared hours ago, leaving nothing but a cloud of dust and the echo of the driver's skeptical parting words. "Ma'am, ain't nothing here worth staying for." The once bustling trading post that her late husband had inexplicably purchased sight unseen now looked like a tomb in the desert. Its faded sign hung by a single nail, creaking in the hot breeze. "Wilson's Trading Post," it proclaimed, though from the looks of it nothing had been traded here for years. As the sun began its slow descent behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the parched earth, Rebecca squared her shoulders and took her first step toward the building that represented her last hope and final chance. Before we continue Rebecca's story, you should know that this desperate moment in the desert was merely the beginning of an extraordinary journey that would challenge everything she believed about herself, about trust, and about what truly constitutes a fortune. The lock on the trading post door was broken, hanging uselessly from splintered wood that showed signs of a forced entry long ago. Rebecca pushed the door open, wincing at the agonized creak of rusted hinges. A cloud of dust billowed outward, causing her to cough and cover her mouth with a handkerchief already damp with perspiration. "Hello," she called out, though she expected no response. The emptiness echoed back at her, confirming what she already knew. She was entirely alone. The interior of the trading post was in shambles. Shelves hung at odd angles, most completely empty, though a few still held ancient tins with labels faded beyond recognition. The counter was coated with a thick layer of dust, broken only by animal tracks and what appeared to be the more recent imprints of human hands. Someone had been here, and not too long ago. Rebecca set down her trunk and surveyed what was to be her new home and livelihood with growing dismay. When her husband Frank had died 6 months ago in that terrible mining accident outside of Sacramento, she discovered that their comfortable life had been built on nothing but debt and desperate gambles. The creditors had taken everything: their house, their furnishings, even her mother's silver. The only thing they couldn't touch was this remote trading post, purchased in Frank's final desperate attempt to recoup their fortunes. "What were you thinking, Frank?" she whispered to the empty room, grief and anger mingling in her voice. "What am I supposed to do with this?" Rebecca had grown up in Boston, the daughter of a successful merchant. She'd been educated, cultured, and completely unprepared for the harsh realities of life as a widow in the West. At 32, she was alone for the first time in her life, with no family to return to and no skills that seemed useful in this wilderness. The back room of the trading post was in marginally better condition than the front. A narrow cot with a questionable mattress stood against one wall. A pot-bellied stove occupied the center of the room, its pipe extending up through the ceiling. A rough wooden table and single chair completed the sparse furnishings. Rebecca opened the single window, hoping to circulate some of the stale air. Outside, the desert was taking on the golden glow of approaching sunset, transforming from a forbidding wasteland to something almost beautiful. In the distance, she could make out the silhouette of what must be Copper Canyon, a gash in the earth that local legend said had once been rich with ore before playing out decades ago. The sound of approaching hoofbeats startled her from her contemplation. Rebecca's heart raced as she hurried to the front of the store. Visitors could mean many things in this remote place: help, information, or danger. A single rider approached, the lean figure of a man atop a dun-colored horse. He rode with the easy confidence of someone who knew this land intimately. As he drew closer, Rebecca could see he was older than she'd first thought. Perhaps in his 50s, with a weathered face, the color and texture of saddle leather beneath. A wide-brimmed hat. The man reined his horse to a stop and studied the trading post with obvious surprise, his eyes eventually settling on Rebecca, standing in the doorway. "Afternoon, ma'am," he called, touching the brim of his hat. "Didn't expect to see Wilson's place occupied again. You passing through?" Rebecca straightened her spine, summoning what dignity she could in her travel-stained mourning clothes. "No, sir. I own this establishment. My name is Rebecca Montgomery." The man's bushy eyebrows rose nearly to his hatband. "Own it, you say?" He dismounted with the stiff movements of someone who'd spent too many years in the saddle. "Name's Caleb Harrington. I run cattle about 10 miles west of here. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Harrington," Rebecca replied formally, though pleasure had little to do with her current state of mind. Caleb approached, his spurs jingling with each step. "If you don't mind my asking, Mrs. Montgomery, how'd you come to own old Wilson's place? Far as anyone knew, Jeremiah Wilson disappeared 3 years back. Most folks figured he died out in the hills, looking for that mine of his." "Mine?" Rebecca asked, her attention caught by this unexpected detail. "My husband purchased this property through a land agent in Sacramento. The previous owner wasn't mentioned." Caleb chuckled, though there was little humor in the sound. "That'd be Wilson. Right enough. Jeremiah Wilson, ornery old prospector who'd been running this trading post for nigh on 20 years. He squinted at the building. Used to be a decent business, supplying the ranchers and the odd prospector. Then Jeremiah got it in his head that he'd found something big up in the canyon. Started spending more time searching than minding the store, eventually just disappeared altogether." Rebecca absorbed this information with growing unease. "And no one looked for him?" "Sheriff Bradley sent out a search party when he missed his regular supply run to town. Found nothing." Caleb shrugged. "It happens out here, Mom. The desert takes plenty of souls, especially them that don't respect it proper." The sun was sinking rapidly now, the temperature already beginning to drop as night approached. Rebecca suddenly realized how vulnerable she was, alone, with night falling, in conversation with a complete stranger. As if sensing her discomfort, Caleb took a step back. "Don't mean to intrude on your evening, Mrs. Montgomery. Just wasn't expecting to see smoke from the chimney when I passed by." He looked around at the desolate landscape. "You got supplies? Water?" "Nearest town's Silver Creek. Good 40 miles. East." "I have some supplies," Rebecca answered, unwilling to admit just how inadequate they were. "I'll be making a trip to town as soon as I'm settled." Caleb nodded, though his expression suggested he doubted that would be happening any time soon. "Well, the creek about a quarter-mile behind the post still runs year-round, despite the name. Water's good there." He hesitated, then added, "My ranch is called the Broken Spur. If you find yourself in need, you follow the trail west till you hit the 3 big boulders, then north about 7 miles. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington. I appreciate the information." Caleb returned to his horse and mounted with practiced ease. "Word of advice, Mrs. Montgomery. Whatever brought you here, and it ain't my business to ask, this ain't a place for a woman alone. These parts can be mighty unforgiving." With that parting comment, he touched his hat again and rode away, leaving Rebecca standing in the doorway of her dilapidated inheritance as darkness began to claim the land. The night brought a chill that penetrated Rebecca's thin dress, forcing her to unpack her meager belongings in search of a shawl. She found the stove functional, though the wood box beside it contained nothing but dust and the desiccated remains of what might have been a rat. After a fruitless search for firewood, she reluctantly broke up one of the empty shelves, telling herself she would replace it once she'd established herself. The small fire provided little comfort as she sat on the edge of the cot, eating a cold supper of bread and cheese from her traveling provisions. The desert night was alive with unfamiliar sounds, the distant howl of coyotes, the rustle of wind through the scrub, occasional scurrying in the walls that suggested she wasn't entirely alone in the building. One day at a time, Rebecca, she whispered to herself, an admonition her father had often repeated during difficult times. She had survived Frank's death and the humiliation of financial ruin. She would survive this as well. Morning came with startling swiftness, the rising sun transforming the eastern sky from black to indigo to fiery orange within what seemed like minutes. Rebecca had slept poorly, unaccustomed to the hard cot and unsettling noises. She rose stiffly, washing her face with water from her canteen and pinning her dark hair into a severe bun. The trading post looked no better in the harsh light of day. If anything, the morning sun revealed even more flaws. A sagging corner in the roof, a floorboard near the counter that had rotted through, a worrying collection of animal droppings near the back storeroom. Rebecca took stock of her situation with ruthless honesty. She had enough food for perhaps 3 days if she rationed carefully. Her water would last less than that. She had $3.17 in coin, a gold locket containing miniatures of her parents, and a pearl-handled derringer that Frank had insisted she carry, though she'd never fired it. And she had the trading post itself, a building that looked as though a strong wind might collapse it, situated in a place where customers seemed unlikely to materialize. The creek Caleb Harrington had mentioned became her first priority. Rebecca found a battered tin bucket in the storeroom and set out in the direction he had indicated. The morning was already warm, promising another scorching day. She followed a faint path behind the trading post, eventually discovering the creek, little more than a trickle of water winding through the rocky ground, but blessedly clear and cool. As she filled the bucket, Rebecca noticed something partially buried in the soft mud of the creek bank, a glint of metal that caught the sunlight. Setting the bucket aside, she knelt and carefully extracted the object. It was a pocket knife, its bone handle discolored from exposure, but still intact. The blade was rusted, but solid, and when Rebecca turned it over in her hand, she saw initials carved into the handle, J.W. Jeremiah Wilson, the missing owner. A chill ran through Rebecca despite the warming day. She pocketed the knife, an uneasy feeling settling over her. The knife looked as though it had been in the elements for some time, but not the 3 years since Wilson's disappearance. Someone had dropped it much more recently. When Rebecca returned to the trading post, bucket in hand, she found she was no longer alone. A wagon stood outside, an older model pulled by a single mule. A woman was examining the building's exterior, clipboard in hand. She was perhaps a few years older than Rebecca, dressed practically in a split riding skirt and white blouse, her auburn hair tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat. She turned as Rebecca approached, revealing a freckled face with intelligent green eyes. "You must be the new owner," the woman said without preamble. Nathaniel at the land office telegraphed that Frank Montgomery's widow might be taking possession. She extended a hand. "Eleanor Dawson. I run the general store in Silver Creek." Rebecca shifted the bucket to her left hand and accepted the handshake. "Rebecca Montgomery. Yes, I arrived yesterday." Eleanor's eyes took in Rebecca's formal dress, now dust-stained and inappropriate for the setting. From back east, I'm guessing. Sacramento, at least. Boston, originally. Most recently, Sacramento. Eleanor nodded, making a note on her clipboard. Well, Mrs. Montgomery, I make supply runs to the outlying properties every 2 weeks. Wilson's, or I suppose it's Montgomery's now, is on my route. I'm surprised Nathaniel didn't mention I'd be coming. The land agent and I had limited correspondence, Rebecca admitted. Most of the transaction was handled through my husband's attorney, and frankly, neither seemed particularly concerned with details that might have been helpful. A smile tugged at the corner of Eleanor's mouth. Men rarely are, in my experience. Well, I've brought the standard delivery. Flour, coffee, beans, bacon, ammunition. I assume you'll want to establish an account. Rebecca hesitated, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. I'm afraid my current financial situation is rather limited. I hadn't anticipated needing supplies so soon. Eleanor studied her thoughtfully. I see. Well, running a trading post means you'll need inventory. Can't very well trade with nothing to offer. She tapped her pencil against the clipboard. How about this? I'll leave the basics on consignment. You sell them, take a small commission, and we settle the difference on my next run. The unexpected generosity took Rebecca aback. That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It's not kindness, Mrs. Montgomery. It's business. Eleanor's tone was brisk but not unkind. This post has been a stop on my route for years. Having it operational again benefits me as much as you, saves me from having to make individual deliveries. To the smaller ranchers and prospectors in this area, it was a lifeline, however pragmatically offered, and Rebecca wasn't in a position to refuse. Then I accept your business proposition, Mrs. Dawson. Miss, Eleanor corrected, never married. And call me Eleanor, please. Formality seems rather pointless this far from civilization. Together they unloaded the wagon, bringing crates and sacks into the trading post. In addition to the food staples, Eleanor had brought kerosene, candles, work gloves, basic tools, and several boxes of ammunition for various firearms. The previous owner kept a ledger, Eleanor mentioned as they worked. Had a whole system for tracking who owed what, might still be around somewhere if looters didn't take it. Rebecca had seen no sign of a ledger in her cursory examination of the premises, but resolved to search more thoroughly. As they arranged goods on the newly cleaned shelves, she found herself warming to the capable storekeeper from Silver Creek. How long have you been in business? Rebecca asked. Took over from my father 10 years ago after he passed, Eleanor replied. Been running the supply routes myself for the last 5. People thought it was scandalous at first. A woman driving a wagon alone through territory like this. She smiled wryly. Now they just think I'm peculiar, which is an improvement, I suppose. Rebecca found herself smiling in return. I suspect I'll be considered peculiar as well, attempting to run this place alone. Oh, without question. Eleanor's frankness was oddly refreshing. But peculiar women tend to manage just fine out here in my experience. It's the proper ladies who struggle. Her gaze took in Rebecca's formal attire again. Speaking of which, I have some more suitable clothing in the wagon. Previous customer couldn't pay her bill, left some things behind. About your size, I'd wager. By midday, the trading post had been transformed. The shelves, while not full, at least contained essential goods. The floor had been swept, the counter cleaned. Rebecca, now dressed in a practical brown skirt and cream-colored blouse, was making notes about repairs needed to make the building truly functional. The roof needs work before the rainy season, Eleanor observed, glancing up at the ceiling where water stains mapped previous leaks. And that back window is an invitation to anyone thinking of helping themselves to your inventory. I noticed that as well, Rebecca agreed. Is there someone in Silver Creek who might be available for such repairs? Eleanor considered the question. Silas Jenkins does carpentry work when he's sober. which isn't as often as one might hope. I can ask when I return." She closed her clipboard. "Now about payment. Standard arrangement is 1/3 commission on consigned goods. That work for you?" "That seems more than fair," Rebecca agreed, though she had no idea what was standard in such arrangements. She hesitated, then asked the question that had been bothering her since Caleb Harrington's visit. "Miss Dawson, Eleanor, what do you know about Jeremiah Wilson, the previous owner?" Eleanor's expression grew careful. "Jeremiah? Known him most of my life. Why do you ask?" Rebecca produced the pocket knife from her pocket. "I found this by the creek this morning." Eleanor took the knife, examining it with obvious recognition. This was Jeremiah's, all right. Never went anywhere without it. She frowned. "Where exactly did you find it?" "Partially buried in the mud near the water. It looked as though it had been there for some time, but not 3 years. Eleanor handed the knife back, her expression troubled. Jeremiah was an odd sort, kept to himself mostly, but fair in his dealings. When he disappeared, most folks assumed he'd finally succumbed to gold fever, gone too deep into the canyon, fallen, or gotten lost. Mr. Harrington mentioned something about a mine. Eleanor sighed. That was Jeremiah's obsession in his later years. Claimed he'd found evidence of a lost Spanish mine up in Copper Canyon. Most people dismissed it as the ramblings of a lonely old man, but Jeremiah was convinced. She shook her head. Spent more and more time searching, less minding the store. Then one day, he just didn't come back. "And you said there was a search?" "Sheriff. Bradley organized it, yes. Followed Jeremiah's usual trails up into the canyon. Found nothing, no body, no sign of camp, nothing to suggest what happened to him." Eleanor's gaze was direct. "Mrs. Montgomery, if you're thinking of trying to pick up where Jeremiah left off, I'd strongly advise against it. Copper Canyon has claimed many lives over the years. Those who go looking for easy riches typically find only trouble." Rebecca tucked the knife away. "I assure you, I have no interest in prospecting, merely curious about the man whose property I now own." The statement was true enough, though the mystery of Jeremiah Wilson's disappearance and the relatively recent appearance of his knife troubled her more than she cared to admit. Eleanor seemed satisfied with the response. "Well, I should be on my way. Got 2 more stops before nightfall." She handed Rebecca a sheet from her clipboard. "Here's the inventory I've left and the agreed-upon prices. I'll be back in 2 weeks, unless you send word to Silver Creek that you need something sooner." As Eleanor prepared to depart, she paused. "One last thing, Mrs. Montgomery. This post is remote, but not unknown. You'll likely get visitors. Some welcome, others less so. There's a shotgun under the counter. Jeremiah kept it loaded." Her expression was serious. "Don't hesitate to use it if necessary." With that sobering advice, Eleanor climbed onto her wagon and set off, leaving Rebecca once again alone at the trading post, though now with supplies, suitable clothing, and an even deeper mystery surrounding her unexpected inheritance. As evening approached, Rebecca sat at the rough table, the pocket knife before her, considering her situation in the fading light. The trading post, for all its dilapidation, represented something she hadn't possessed in the months since Frank's death. Independence. Here, far from the judging eyes of Sacramento society and the pitying glances of former friends, she could rebuild her life on her own terms. The knife bothered her, though. If Jeremiah Wilson had indeed disappeared 3 years ago, how had his pocket knife ended up recently buried by the creek? Had he returned, only to meet with some misfortune? Or had someone else been carrying it? And if so, who and why? Rebecca was startled from her thoughts by a sound at the front of the building, the unmistakable creak of the door opening slowly. She froze, remembering Eleanor's warning and the shotgun she had yet to locate. "Hello," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. "The trading post is closed for the evening." Silence greeted her words. Then the soft sound of footsteps crossing the wooden floor. Rebecca stood, her heart hammering in her chest as she reached for the only weapon at hand, Jeremiah Wilson's pocket knife. A figure appeared in the doorway to the back room, tall, broad-shouldered, silhouetted against the fading light from the front windows. A man's deep voice broke the tense silence. So it's true, someone's finally claiming old Jeremiah's place. The figure stepped forward, resolving into a man of perhaps 40, dressed in the practical clothing of a prospector. His face was half hidden by a beard, but his eyes were startlingly blue against his sun-darkened skin. Interesting timing, wouldn't you say? Right when things are finally getting good up in the canyon. Rebecca gripped the knife tighter, keeping the table between them. "I'm afraid you have me at a disadvantage, sir," the man smiled, though the expression didn't reach his eyes. "Name's Daniel Burke. I was a friend of Jeremiah's." His gaze flicked to the knife in her hand, recognition dawning. "Now, where did you find that, I wonder?" Rebecca kept the knife steady, though her hand trembled slightly. "I found it by the creek. Are you saying it belongs to you, Mr. Burke?" Daniel Burke moved further into the room, his gaze never leaving the knife. "Not mine. That's Jeremiah's knife, right enough. J.W. carved into the handle himself." He leaned against the doorframe with a casualness that seemed forced. Strange that it would turn up now, after all this time. Perhaps not so strange, Rebecca countered, unwilling to show fear despite her vulnerability. This was his home, after all. Burke studied her with undisguised curiosity. "And now it's yours. Convenient inheritance?" "Hardly convenient," Rebecca replied tersely. "My husband purchased this property before his death. I had no choice but to claim it when everything else was lost." Something like sympathy flickered across Burke's features. "My condolences, Mrs. Montgomery. Rebecca Montgomery." Burke nodded slowly. "Well, Mrs. Montgomery, seems we both have an interest in Jeremiah Wilson, though for different reasons." He straightened from the doorframe. "I've been prospecting these parts for 5 years. Jeremiah and I shared information, helped each other out. When he disappeared, I took it upon myself to keep looking. For him, or for his supposed mine?" Rebecca asked bluntly. A smile creased Burke's weathered face. "Sharp, aren't you? For both, I suppose. Jeremiah was convinced he'd found something. Big up in the canyon. Something the Spanish missed when they worked these hills 200 years ago." He gestured toward the knife. "Finding that knife suggests he might have made it back this far, at least." Rebecca considered this. "The sheriff organized a search when he disappeared. Wouldn't they have found the knife if it had been there then?" "Unless it wasn't there to find," Burke pointed out. "Sheriff Bradley's a good man, but his search was 3 years ago. That knife could have been dropped more recently." The implication hung in the air between them. If Jeremiah Wilson had returned months or even weeks ago, why hadn't he made his presence known? And where was he now? "Mr. Burke," Rebecca said carefully, "I appreciate your connection to the previous owner, but it's growing late, and I've had a trying day. Perhaps we could continue this conversation another time." Burke seemed ready to object, then thought better of it. "Of course, didn't mean to intrude." He reached slowly into his vest pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. "My claim's about 3 miles up the canyon. If you find anything else of Jeremiah's, anything at all, I'd be mighty interested." He placed the paper on the table. "Map to my camp if you need to find me." After Burke departed, Rebecca secured the door as best she could with a chair wedged under the handle. Sleep eluded her as she replayed the day's encounters in her mind. Caleb Harrington, Eleanor Dawson, and now Daniel Burke. 3 very different reactions to her presence, each carrying pieces of information about Jeremiah Wilson. And the abandoned trading post she now called home. Morning brought clear skies and a renewed determination. Rebecca had never been one to wallow in uncertainty. a trait her father had both admired and occasionally lamented. "You charge at problems like a bull, Becca," he'd often said. "Sometimes it's better to circle them first." Today, she would circle the problem. The trading post needed a thorough examination if she were to make it both habitable and profitable. Starting with the main room, Rebecca began a methodical inspection of every corner, shelf, and floorboard. The counter, a solid oak affair that had weathered the years better than most of the building, revealed its first secret by mid-morning. Rebecca found a narrow drawer hidden beneath the main surface, its pull disguised as part of the decorative molding. Inside lay a small brass key and a folded sheet of paper yellowed with age. The paper contained a hand-drawn map of the surrounding area, far more detailed than the rough directions Burke had left. It showed the trading post, the creek, several marked trails, and a series of X's leading up into what must be Copper Canyon. The final X was circled repeatedly with the notation "Mother Lode" written beside it in faded ink. Rebecca studied the map with growing interest. Was this evidence of Jeremiah Wilson's obsession or something more? The neat handwriting and careful measurements suggested a methodical mind, not the wild fantasies of a gold-fevered prospector. The brass key proved more immediately practical. It fit perfectly into the lock of a battered metal cash box Rebecca discovered beneath a loose floorboard in the storeroom. Inside, protected from the elements, lay Jeremiah's business ledger. Exactly what Eleanor had mentioned might still exist. The ledger revealed Jeremiah Wilson as a meticulous record keeper. Each transaction was noted in precise handwriting, with customer names, items purchased, prices and payment methods all carefully documented. Some customers had running accounts, paying when they could with cash, furs or services. The final entries were dated 3 years and 2 months ago, just before Jeremiah's disappearance. The last page held something unexpected, a list of names with amounts beside them. Unlike the transaction records, these appeared to be personal debts, money Jeremiah owed to others, or perhaps investments in something unspecified. 3 names stood out: C. Harrington, $50, E. Dawson, $75, and D. Burke, $150. Caleb, Eleanor, and Daniel, all of whom had appeared at the trading post within 24 hours of Rebecca's arrival. The coincidence seemed too great to ignore. More intriguing still was a name Rebecca didn't recognize: J. Bradley, $300. If Sheriff Bradley had invested such a substantial sum in Jeremiah's venture, why hadn't Eleanor mentioned it when discussing the search for the missing man? Rebecca's ruminations were interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Moving to the front window, she saw 3 riders approaching, 2 men and a woman, all dressed in the practical clothing of ranchers. The woman dismounted first, a tall, capable-looking figure with silver-streaked black hair tied back in a no-nonsense braid. She strode toward the trading post with confidence, the men following a step behind. "Delivery from Broken Spur," the woman announced as she entered, carrying a crate of what appeared to be fresh vegetables. "Mr. Harrington said you might be needing provisions." Her sharp eyes took in Rebecca's changed appearance, the practical clothing and determined expression. "Martha Harrington, Caleb's sister-in-law. These are our ranch hands, Tom and Will." Rebecca welcomed them, grateful for both the fresh food and the human contact. Martha proved to be direct and practical, asking pointed questions about Rebecca's plans for the trading post while the 2 ranch hands unloaded additional supplies: firewood, fresh water in barrels, and a small crate of tools. "Caleb said you were setting up shop again," Martha explained. "Trading posts useful to all the ranches in the area, saves a journey to Silver Creek for basics." She examined the newly stocked shelves with approval. "Eleanor's been by already, I see." "Yes, just yesterday," Rebecca confirmed, arranging the vegetables in a basket. "She was very helpful." Martha nodded, unsurprised. Eleanor's got a good head for business. Not much gets past her. Her gaze sharpened. You've found Jeremiah's ledger, then? Rebecca hesitated, then decided honesty was the best approach. Yes, just this morning. I understand Jeremiah had accounts with several people in the area. Most everyone, Martha agreed. Jeremiah believed in community. She didn't elaborate on that cryptic statement, instead turning to survey the building's condition. Roof needs work. Will and Tom can take a look, if you'd like. The offer was clearly genuine, and Rebecca gratefully accepted. While the men examined the roof, Martha shared practical advice about surviving in the harsh environment, which plants were edible, how to preserve food without ice, how to predict weather changes from subtle signs in the landscape. Why are you helping me? Rebecca finally asked bluntly. Not that I'm ungrateful, but we're strangers. Martha's weathered face creased in a smile. Caleb says you've got sand. Coming out here alone takes courage. She shrugged. Besides, Broken Spur needs this trading post operational. Practical matter. There was more to it than that, Rebecca suspected, but Martha's forthright manner suggested she wasn't hiding anything sinister. Perhaps it truly was as simple as neighbors, helping neighbors in a harsh land where cooperation meant survival. By midday, Will and Tom had patched the worst of the roof leaks and reinforced the sagging corner. Martha had helped Rebecca organize the storeroom, unearthing serviceable furniture that had been buried under years of accumulated junk. The trading post was beginning to look almost respectable. As Martha prepared to leave, she paused, her expression turning serious. Word of advice, Mrs. Montgomery. Daniel Burke's been asking questions about you in Silver Creek. Man's got a reputation for finding trouble, or making it. He visited yesterday evening, Rebecca admitted, claimed to be a friend of Jeremiah's. Martha's expression darkened. Burke worked with Jeremiah sometimes, true enough. Whether that made them friends is another matter. She hesitated, then added, Jeremiah wasn't just a shopkeeper. He was educated, engineering background, knew geology. Burke lacks that knowledge, but he's got ambition enough for 10 men. This new information added another dimension to Rebecca's understanding of Jeremiah Wilson. Not a delusional prospector after all, but a trained professional who might genuinely have discovered something significant. After the Broken Spur contingent departed, Rebecca returned to her examination of the ledger. The regular business entries showed a steady decline in the months before Jeremiah's disappearance, suggesting he had indeed been neglecting the store in favor of his prospecting activities. Then she noticed something odd, small notations in the margins of certain entries, combinations of letters and numbers that didn't correspond to any obvious business purpose. They appeared primarily next to transactions with 5 customers: Caleb Harrington, Martha Harrington, Eleanor Dawson, Sheriff Bradley, and Daniel Burke. The notations weren't consistent enough to be a simple code for credit terms or payment schedules. Rebecca copied them onto a separate sheet of paper, looking for patterns. While the combinations varied, one sequence appeared repeatedly: ML4NE. Daniel Burke's invitation to his camp carried obvious risks. A woman alone, visiting a solitary prospector miles from civilization, was imprudent at best, potentially disastrous at worst. Yet the alternative, remaining in ignorance while various interested parties circled her property, seemed equally dangerous. Rebecca removed a floorboard beneath her cot and created a small hiding place for Jeremiah's ledger and map. If something happened to her, at least the documents wouldn't immediately fall into opportunistic hands. She dressed in the practical clothing Eleanor had provided, tucked her derringer into a pocket, and ate a spare breakfast of hardtack and dried beef. The map Burke had left showing the location of his camp was straightforward enough. Follow the creek upstream for about 2 miles, then veer northwest at a distinctive rock formation. Rebecca filled a canteen, packed a small sack with food, and set off just as the sun cleared the eastern ridges. The morning was glorious despite her apprehension, the air still cool and sweet before the day's heat built. Desert wildflowers dotted the landscape with unexpected color, tiny purple blooms nestled among rocks, delicate yellow blossoms swaying on slender stems. Birds darted and swooped, their calls echoing in the clear air. Rebecca followed the creek. As it wound through increasingly rocky terrain, the water level was low but steady, suggesting a reliable source deeper in the canyon. She maintained a brisk pace, alert for any sign of movement that might indicate she wasn't alone. Though she saw no one, the prickling sensation between her shoulder blades suggested watchful eyes. The rock formation marking her turn appeared precisely as indicated on Burke's map, a stack of 3 rounded boulders balanced improbably atop one another, resembling a crude snowman crafted from stone. Rebecca paused to consult both maps, Burke's simple directions and Jeremiah's more detailed rendering. A realization struck her. The rock formation was also marked on Jeremiah's map, not with an X, but with a small triangle. Other landmarks had similar triangular notations, different from the series of X's that supposedly led to the mother lode. Were these navigational markers of some kind? Meeting points? Or something else entirely? The trail northwest from the rock formation was less defined, requiring Rebecca to pick her way carefully through loose scree and around prickly desert vegetation. The sun climbed higher, its heat intensifying with every passing minute. By mid-morning, Rebecca was grateful for her canteen and the wide-brimmed hat Martha had insisted she take. Burke's camp appeared suddenly as she rounded a bend, a small cabin nestled against a cliff face, nearly invisible until one was almost upon it. A thin wisp of smoke rose from a metal chimney, suggesting Burke was in residence. A mule dozed in a small corral beside the structure, raising its head curiously as Rebecca approached. Before she could call out, the cabin door opened, and Burke emerged, rifle in hand. He lowered the weapon when he recognized her. "Wasn't sure you'd come," he remarked, returning the rifle to a rack beside the door. "Most women would have more sense." "Most women haven't found themselves in my position," Rebecca countered. "Knowledge seems preferable to ignorance at this point." Burke acknowledged this with a nod. "Come in then. Not exactly fancy accommodations, but it's cooler inside." The cabin's interior was surprisingly orderly for a bachelor prospector's dwelling. A small table and 2 chairs occupied one corner, a narrow cot the other. A stone fireplace with an iron pot hanging over banked coals provided cooking facilities. Every available wall space was covered with maps, diagrams, and handwritten notes pinned directly to the logs. Burke gestured to one of the chairs. "Coffee?" "Just brewed it," Rebecca accepted, using the moment to study the materials covering the walls. Many were similar to Jeremiah's map, renderings of Copper Canyon from different angles with various markers and notations. Others were geological, diagrams, cross-sections of rock formations with layers carefully identified and labeled. "Quite the collection," she observed, accepting a tin mug of strong black coffee. 3 years' worth of work," Burke replied, taking the other chair. "Mine and Jeremiah's both." He studied her over the rim of his mug. "You brought his map?" Rebecca met his gaze steadily. "I examined it at the creek, yes, but I didn't bring it with me today." A brief frown crossed Burke's features, quickly replaced by a calculating smile. "Cautious, good. You'll need that quality." He set his mug down with deliberate care. "How much do you know about gold mining, Mrs. Montgomery?" "Very little," Rebecca admitted. "My husband worked in the silver mines near Sacramento, but I was never involved in the technical aspects." Burke nodded. "Most gold in these parts was played out decades ago. Surface deposits, stream beds, that sort of thing. Easy pickings. What remains requires more sophisticated extraction, deep mining, crushing ore, chemical processes." He gestured toward the diagrams on the walls. "That's where Jeremiah's expertise came in. Man knew geology, understood how gold deposits form. He wasn't just looking for loose nuggets, he was looking for the source. The mother lode, Rebecca said, recalling the notation on the map. Exactly. Burke's eyes lit with enthusiasm. The Spanish worked these canyons in the 1700s, took out a fortune before the Apaches drove them off. Legend says they sealed the entrance to their richest mine rather than let it fall into Apache hands. Left markers only their countrymen would recognize. Rebecca remained skeptical. Such legends exist throughout the West, Mr. Burke. Few prove to have substance. True enough, he conceded, but Jeremiah found something concrete, Spanish artifacts up in a part of the canyon no one had explored thoroughly. Mining tools, pottery fragments, physical evidence. If that's true, why didn't he simply file a claim? Why all the secrecy? Burke's expression darkened. Because claiming a mine means revealing its location, and once that happens, it's only a matter of time before someone with more money or more guns takes it for themselves. He leaned forward. That's mining law for you, Mrs. Montgomery, full of loopholes for the powerful and connected. The bitterness in his voice suggested personal experience with such injustices. Rebecca filed this information away, another piece in the growing puzzle of Daniel Burke. So instead of filing a claim, Jeremiah sought investors, she asked. Sheriff Bradley, Eleanor Dawson, the Harringtons? Burke's eyebrows rose in surprise. You've been busy. Found his ledger too, I take it. I did, Rebecca acknowledged, seeing no point in denial. All of you invested substantial sums in whatever Jeremiah discovered. Yet none of you mentioned this when discussing his disappearance. Would you have believed me if I'd started by saying, hello, I gave your predecessor money for a lost Spanish mine? Burke shook his head. Besides, investments like that are private matters, especially when they haven't paid off yet. Rebecca considered this reasoning. It made a certain logical sense, yet still felt incomplete. You said Jeremiah vanished 3 years ago. Why has no one continued the search for this mine in his absence? Burke rose and moved to a particular map on the wall, one showing a detailed rendering of a specific canyon branch. We tried, all of us, in our own ways, but Jeremiah kept the final piece to himself. He tapped the map. We know the general area. We've even found some of the markers, but the mine entrance itself, he shrugged. Jeremiah said he'd found it, but he died or disappeared before revealing the exact location. And you believe I now have information that could lead to this location? Rebecca asked directly. I believe Jeremiah left more detailed records than what we've found so far, Burke replied carefully. The map you have, the notations in his ledger, possibly other documents hidden at the trading post. His blue eyes fixed on hers intently. Mrs. Montgomery, there's enough gold in that lost mine to make everyone involved wealthy beyond imagination. Jeremiah understood that. It's why he brought in partners instead of trying to work it alone. Rebecca considered her response carefully. Burke was either a consummate actor or genuinely believed what he was saying. Either way, his intensity was unsettling. Even if what you say is true, Mr. Burke, I have no interest in prospecting. I came here to establish a business, not chase legends of Spanish gold. Burke smiled thinly. Noble sentiment, but consider your position. Isolated trading post, barely habitable, limited funds, harsh environment. How long do you really think you can survive out here alone? The truth of his assessment stung, but Rebecca refused to show it. I've managed challenges before. I'm sure you have, Burke acknowledged. But why struggle when there's an alternative? Help us find what Jeremiah discovered, take a fair share, and you'd never need to worry about survival again. Rebecca stood, indicating the conversation was concluding. Thank you for the coffee and the information, Mr. Burke. I need to return to the trading post before the day gets any hotter. Burke rose as well, disappointment evident in his expression. Think about what I've said, Mrs. Montgomery, and be careful about who else you discuss this with. Some of Jeremiah's investors have more to lose than others if the truth comes out. The veiled warning lingered in Rebecca's mind as she made her way back along the trail. Burke had provided information, certainly, but also raised new questions. Who among Jeremiah's investors might be dangerous? What truth was Burke referring to? And most pressingly, if Jeremiah had truly found this lost mine, what had happened to prevent him from sharing its location with his partners? The sun had reached its zenith by the time Rebecca returned to the trading post. To her surprise, a wagon stood outside, not Eleanor's supply wagon, but a smaller rig with a canvas cover. A slender figure in a dark blue dress was attempting to peer through the trading post window. "May I help you?" Rebecca called as she approached. The woman turned quickly, revealing a young face with delicate features and intelligent brown eyes. She appeared to be in her early 20s, her chestnut hair neatly arranged beneath a modest bonnet. "Oh, you must be Mrs. Montgomery," the young woman exclaimed. "I'm sorry to intrude. I'm Abigail Bradley, the sheriff's daughter." She extended a gloved hand. "Father mentioned you'd taken over Mr. Wilson's trading post. I thought you might appreciate some proper linens and kitchenware." The unexpected kindness from a stranger momentarily left Rebecca speechless. "That's very thoughtful, Miss Bradley. Please, come in." The interior of the trading post seemed particularly shabby when viewed through a visitor's eyes, but Abigail showed no sign of disdain as she helped unload her wagon. In addition to linens and kitchenware, she had brought several books, a writing desk, and a small looking-glass. "These were gathering dust in our attic," Abigail explained, setting the books on the newly cleared table. "Father never reads anything but legal documents, and I've memorized these particular volumes." Rebecca examined the titles, a collection of Emerson's essays, 2 novels by Dickens, and a well-worn volume of Shakespeare's sonnets. "You're very well read, Miss Bradley." Abigail smiled wryly. "Limited options for entertainment in Silver Creek, I'm afraid. Books are my escape." She glanced around the trading post with undisguised curiosity. "You've made remarkable progress already. When Father described the condition of this place, I imagined something far worse." "It's been a community effort," Rebecca acknowledged. "The Harringtons provided materials, and Eleanor Dawson's inventory gives the place some purpose." Abigail nodded, unsurprised. Silver Creek and the surrounding ranches depend on each other. The trading post was an important connection point before Mr. Wilson. She trailed off delicately. Before he disappeared, Rebecca finished for her. "Yes, I've heard the story from several perspectives now." Something flickered in Abigail's expression, caution, perhaps, or concern. "People still talk about it. Father especially seems unable to let the matter rest." "He was in charge of the search, I understand," Rebecca observed, watching the young woman's reaction. "Yes, though he rarely discusses the details with me." Abigail busied herself arranging the linens on a shelf. "Father became quite preoccupied after Mr. Wilson vanished. Sometimes I think he takes his failure to find answers as a personal affront." This aligned with what Rebecca had observed in the sheriff's demeanor, the carefully controlled frustration of a man accustomed to resolving problems. But it added another dimension to consider. Was Bradley's $300 investment in Jeremiah's venture related to his persistent interest in the case, or merely coincidental? "Your father seems very thorough," Rebecca remarked neutrally. "To a fault," Abigail agreed with a small smile. "He's determined to maintain order in his jurisdiction, even when that means inserting himself into matters others might consider private." She paused, her expression turning serious. "Mrs. Montgomery, I hope you won't think me forward, but I feel I should warn you. Silver Creek appears peaceful, but undercurrents exist. My father's position gives him certain insights into people's character and activities." "Are you suggesting I should be wary of someone in particular?" Rebecca asked directly. Abigail hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with outright gossip. I wouldn't presume to tell you who to trust. I merely suggest that you exercise caution, especially regarding matters connected to Mr. Wilson. Before Rebecca could press for clarification, the sound of approaching riders interrupted their conversation. Through the window, she saw 3 men on horseback, none of whom she recognized, heading directly for the trading post. Customers, perhaps, Abigail suggested. Though her tone suggested otherwise, Rebecca moved to the counter where Eleanor had mentioned the shotgun was kept. Sure enough, a well-maintained scattergun lay in a concealed compartment, loaded and ready. She didn't remove it, but knowing its location provided some comfort. The riders dismounted with the easy confidence of men accustomed to commanding respect or fear. Their clothing suggested miners rather than ranchers, dusty and worn, but of good quality. The leader, a broad-shouldered man with a neatly trimmed beard and cold eyes, entered first. His gaze swept the trading post before settling on Rebecca. "Mrs. Montgomery," he stated rather than asked. "Miles Blackwood. I represent Western Consolidated Mining." He didn't extend his hand. "I understand you've recently taken possession of this property." Rebecca maintained her composure, though Abigail's sudden tension was palpable beside her. "That's correct, Mr. Blackwood. My husband purchased it before his death." Blackwood nodded, as if confirming information already known. "Western Consolidated is interested in acquiring properties in this region. We're prepared to make a generous offer for this trading post and the surrounding land, significantly above market value." The abruptness of the offer took Rebecca by surprise. "I'm not interested in selling, Mr. Blackwood. I've only just arrived." A flicker of annoyance crossed Blackwood's features. "Perhaps you misunderstand the opportunity, Mrs. Montgomery. We're offering $3,000 for a dilapidated building in the middle of nowhere. You could return to civilization with enough capital to establish yourself comfortably." The sum was indeed generous, far more than the property could possibly be worth based on its apparent commercial value. Rebecca's suspicion immediately deepened. "As I said, I'm not interested in selling, but thank you for your offer." Blackwood studied her with cold calculation. "Women in your position often find frontier life more challenging than anticipated. I suggest you consider our offer carefully before declining." His gaze shifted to Abigail, a hint of recognition in his eyes. "Miss Bradley, does your father know you're out here alone?" "I'm hardly alone, Mr. Blackwood," Abigail replied with surprising steel in her voice. "And yes, father is well aware of my whereabouts. Something unspoken passed between them. A history or conflict Rebecca wasn't privy to." Blackwood broke the tension with an insincere smile. "Well, we won't take more of your time today. Mrs. Montgomery, our offer remains open. When you're ready to discuss it further, you can find me at the Silver Creek Hotel." He tipped his hat with mock politeness and departed, his companions following without having spoken a word. As the riders disappeared down the trail, Abigail released a breath she seemed to have been holding. "Miles Blackwood is not a man to be underestimated, Mrs. Montgomery. Western Consolidated has been buying properties throughout the territory, often using questionable methods to pressure reluctant sellers." What interest could a mining company have in an abandoned trading post? Rebecca wondered aloud, though the answer seemed increasingly obvious given what she'd learned from Burke. "That's the question, isn't it?" Abigail agreed. "They've acquired several properties in this area recently, none with obvious mining potential. Father's been investigating, but corporate interests have powerful friends in the territorial government." Rebecca thought of Jeremiah's map and the cryptic notations in his ledger. If Western Consolidated believed the lost Spanish mine was real, and somewhere on or near her property, their interest made perfect sense. "Thank you for the warning, Miss Bradley," Rebecca said sincerely, "and for the linens and books. Your kindness means more than you know." Abigail smiled, gathering her bonnet and gloves. "Silver Creek needs good people, Mrs. Montgomery. Those of us who care about more than gold and greed must support each other." She paused at the door. "If you need anything at all, send word to town. I'm often confined by social expectations, but I'm not entirely without resources or courage." After Abigail's departure, Rebecca returned to the hiding place beneath the floorboard and retrieved Jeremiah's materials. The map and ledger now carried new significance in light of Burke's information and Blackwood's unexpected offer. She spread the map on the table, studying it with fresh eyes. The series of X's leading into the canyon told one story, but what about the triangular markers? Burke had mentioned Spanish artifacts. Could these triangles represent such findings? The ledger provided another perspective. Rebecca had initially focused on the financial transactions, but now she examined the personal notes and cryptic marginalia more carefully. In addition to the ML4NE notation, several entries included references to SM, followed by directional indicators and numbers. A pattern began to emerge. If ML stood for Mother Lode and SM for Spanish Mine, then these might indeed be navigational instructions. The numbers could represent distances or specific markers. A sudden realization struck Rebecca. The ledger wasn't merely a record of business transactions. It was a coded map, designed to be meaningless to anyone who didn't possess the physical map as a reference point. Jeremiah had split his secret between two documents, neither complete without the other. As the desert sunset painted the trading post in gold and amber hues, Rebecca faced a crossroads. She had come to Nevada territory seeking simply to survive, to rebuild some semblance of independence from the wreckage of her former life. Now she found herself in possession of information that might lead to extraordinary wealth or extraordinary danger. Three paths lay before her: sell to Western Consolidated and return east with enough money to start anew, partner with Burke and the other investors to seek the lost mine, or destroy the map and ledger, focus solely on the trading post, and leave the secrets of Copper Canyon buried with Jeremiah Wilson. Before she could contemplate these options further, a sound outside caught her attention, the soft scuff of a boot on wooden steps. Rebecca quickly folded the map and slid it beneath a stack of invoices as the trading post door swung open. Sheriff Bradley stood in the doorway, his expression grave. "Mrs. Montgomery, I'm afraid I have disturbing news." He removed his hat. "There's been an incident at Daniel Burke's camp. His cabin has been burned to the ground." Rebecca's blood ran cold. "And Mr. Burke missing," Bradley replied grimly, "along with any records or maps he might have had." His sharp eyes noted the corner of Jeremiah's map visible beneath the invoices. "I need to ask you some questions about your visit to his camp this morning." The day passed in careful progress through rugged terrain. Eaglefeather moved with the instinctive grace of one born to the landscape, occasionally pointing out landmarks or plants of significance. The Mitchell women, though still weakened by their ordeal, found unexpected reserves of determination. Even Anne, who had always been considered delicate, scrambled over rocks and forded shallow streams without complaint. By midday, they had covered considerable ground. During their brief rest, Catherine approached Eaglefeather with tentative curiosity. "How do you navigate without a compass?" she asked. "There are no marked trails here." "The land speaks to those who listen," he replied, pointing to subtle signs Catherine had overlooked. The pattern of lichen on rocks indicating north, the specific tilt of certain plants following the sun's path, distant mountain profiles providing consistent reference points. Catherine absorbed the lesson with growing respect. "Our father used to say that knowledge comes in many forms. I think he would have appreciated yours." Eaglefeather acknowledged this with a slight nod. "And I would have respected his. My father taught me to read white men's books alongside my mother's teachings about the natural world. Both have value. They resumed their journey, the mutual wariness between the Mitchells and their guide gradually giving way to cautious rapport. Elizabeth scouted ahead with Eagle Feather, her natural leadership complementing his wilderness experience. Catherine continued her impromptu study of native plants, mentally cataloguing their properties. Anne mapped their progress on a scrap of paper, creating her own system of symbols for landmarks. Only Sarah remained somewhat distant, her thoughts constantly shifting between gratitude for their rescue and anxiety about their uncertain future. The weight of her family's survival pressed upon her like a physical burden. As twilight approached, Eagle Feather led them to a protected hollow beneath an overhanging cliff. "We will camp here tonight," he announced. "There is water nearby, and the rock will hide our fire from distant eyes." While the girls gathered firewood and prepared their simple meal, Sarah stood at the edge of their campsite, gazing westward toward the fading light. Somewhere in that direction lay Daniel's homestead, the promise of security that had driven them from Maryland into this wilderness. She felt Eagle Feather's presence before he spoke. "You are troubled." Sarah didn't turn. "I've led my daughters into disaster. Everything we owned is destroyed. Even if we reach Prescott, I have nothing left to build a new life." "You have what matters most," Eagle Feather said quietly. "Your daughters live. You live. The rest is just things." "Things that meant security," Sarah countered. "Things that meant we wouldn't starve or freeze when winter comes." Eagle Feather moved to stand beside her, his gaze following hers toward the horizon. "When my wife and daughter died, I abandoned my father's trading post. I lived in the mountains, alone for nearly 2 years, hunting only what I needed, speaking to no one. I thought I had lost everything worth living for." Sarah turned to study his profile, sharp against the darkening sky. "What changed?" "An elder from my mother's people found me. He said, 'The dead are not honored by throwing away the life they would have cherished.'" It was many months before I understood his wisdom. Eagle Feather looked directly at Sarah. "Your daughters need you to believe in tomorrow, even when it seems impossible." The simplicity and truth of his words penetrated Sarah's despair. Whatever uncertainties lay ahead, she still had her girls. They still had each other. It would have to be enough. That night, as the fire burned low and the stars emerged in brilliant profusion, Sarah felt a subtle shift within herself. Not hope exactly, but perhaps its precursor, the recognition that survival itself was a kind of triumph. She didn't realize that Eagle Feather watched her from across the fire, seeing in her resilience a mirror of his own painful journey from devastation to tentative renewal. Neither spoke of what passed between them in those quiet moments. Neither needed to. The second day of their journey brought new challenges. By mid-morning, dark clouds gathered on the western horizon, threatening the first significant rainfall in months. Eagle Feather studied the approaching storm with concern. "We must find shelter before it breaks," he told Sarah as they paused atop a ridge. "Desert rains can be dangerous. Flash floods come without warning." Elizabeth shaded her eyes. "Against the sun. There's nothing but open country ahead. There are caves in the Red Cliffs." Eagle Feather pointed to a distant formation. "We can reach them before the storm, if we hurry." They quickened their pace, Lillian now riding on Eagle Feather's shoulders to spare the horse for their supplies. The temperature dropped precipitously as the storm clouds advanced, casting the landscape in premature twilight. Thunder rumbled across the plains, startling a herd of pronghorn antelope into flight. "It's coming faster than I expected," Eagle Feather admitted, his usual confidence wavering. The first heavy raindrops struck as they reached the base of the Red Cliffs. Within moments, the gentle patter transformed into a violent downpour. Eta streamed down the rock face and pooled at their feet, quickly rising. "There!" Anne shouted, pointing to a dark opening halfway up the cliff face. "A cave!" Eagle Feather assessed the steep climb. "The path will be slippery." He handed Lillian to Sarah. "I'll go first with a rope. The rest of you follow only when I signal." Using his hunting knife to gain purchase in the softening clay, Eagle Feather scaled the cliff face with practiced efficiency. Upon reaching the cave entrance, he secured a rope and lowered it for the others. Elizabeth went next, followed by Catherine, then Anne. Sarah came last, with Lillian clinging to her back. The rain intensified, making each handhold treacherous. Halfway up, Sarah's foot slipped on the slick clay. She swung outward, dangling momentarily over the rapidly filling wash below. "Hold. On!" Eagle Feather shouted, already descending to assist. Before he could reach her, Elizabeth and Catherine pulled frantically on the rope from above. Their combined efforts stabilized Sarah long enough for her to regain her footing. With a final desperate lunge, she reached the cave entrance, where Eagle Feather's strong hands pulled her and Lillian to safety. They collapsed inside, soaked and gasping as lightning split the sky outside. The storm's fury seemed to mock their narrow escape, winds howling through the canyon like vengeful spirits. "That was too close," Sarah whispered, holding Lillian tightly against her. "Thank you, all of you." Eagle Feather moved deeper into the cave, using a small torch fashioned from resinous wood to light their surroundings. The cave extended farther than expected, opening into a series of chambers. Ancient handprints decorated the walls alongside faded pictographs of animals and hunters. "This place is old," he said with quiet reverence. "My people's ancestors sheltered here long before the Spanish came." Catherine approached the wall paintings, fascinated. "Who made these?" "The ancient ones, those who built the cliff cities. To the north." Eagle Feather touched one of the handprints gently. "They vanished centuries ago, but their spirit remains in places like this." While the storm raged outside, they made camp in the cave's inner chamber. Using wood that previous travelers had stored, Eagle Feather built a small fire that cast dancing shadows across the ancient artwork. The girls huddled near its warmth, their wet clothing steaming gently. "Will the storm delay us long?" Sarah asked, conscious of Lillian's lingering weakness and their dwindling supplies. "A day, perhaps," Eagle Feather replied. "The washes will be dangerous to cross until the water recedes." As the afternoon faded into evening, Anne discovered a natural cistern in the cave's depths, a deep pool of fresh water collected from centuries of seepage through the porous sandstone. This unexpected blessing allowed them to refill their containers and even wash away the worst of the trail's grime. That night, their enforced shelter created a moment of peace amid their desperate journey. Lillian's breathing had improved enough for her to join in when Anne began singing softly, a lullaby their father had taught them in what now seemed like another lifetime. After the girls fell asleep, Sarah found Eagle Feather standing at the cave entrance, watching the storm's fury gradually subside. Lightning still flickered occasionally, illuminating his profile in stark relief against the darkness. "I keep thinking about what you said yesterday," Sarah began, coming to stand beside him. "About your wife and daughter." Eagle Feather remained silent, but his posture acknowledged her presence. "I lost my husband 3 years ago to pneumonia," she continued. "It was peaceful. He simply didn't wake one morning. I've often thought that was a mercy compared to," she faltered, unable to articulate the violence they had witnessed. "Compared to watching him die at another's hand," Eagle Feather finished. "Yes, there is a difference." "Does it ever fade?" Sarah asked. "The anger," Eagle Feather considered this carefully. "Not fade, transform like water over stone. It shapes you differently with time." "I'm not sure I want to be reshaped," Sarah admitted. "We don't choose whether life changes us," he replied. "Only how we meet that change." They stood together in companionable silence until the last rumbles of thunder faded into the distance. Before returning to her sleeping daughters, Sarah spoke once more. "James," she said softly, "I'm glad it was you who found us." Dawn revealed a transformed landscape. The previously dusty terrain had erupted into vibrant life overnight, dormant seeds awakening, desert flowers unfurling, small creatures emerging from burrows to drink from temporary pools. The air smelled of wet earth and sage. Eagle Feather studied the terrain with experienced eyes. "The main washes will be impassable until midday. We should remain here until then." The unexpected respite allowed them to thoroughly dry their clothing and belongings. While Eagle Feather hunted along the cliff base, bringing back 2 rabbits and a clutch of quail eggs, Sarah led the girls in taking inventory of their remaining supplies. "We have enough food for 2 days if we're careful," Elizabeth calculated. "The medicine is holding out and Lillian seems stronger today." Lillian, eager to prove her recovery, had appointed herself guardian of their small campfire. "Mr. Eagle Feather said we'll reach his people's trading post tomorrow if the ground dries enough to travel." "And then what, Mother?" Catherine asked, quietly, voicing the question that had been troubling them all. "Even if we reach Prescott, how will we ever get to Uncle Daniel? How will we start over with nothing?" Sarah smoothed her daughter's tangled hair. "One step at a time. First we survive, then we reach safety. The rest will follow." By early afternoon, the landscape had dried sufficiently for travel. Eagle Feather guided them along the higher ridges, avoiding the still, swollen stream beds. The desert's brief flowering made their journey almost pleasant. The harsh terrain softened by patches of wildflowers and the calls of birds that had appeared seemingly from nowhere. "It's like the world is celebrating," Anne observed, her artistic nature responding to the transformation around them. "The desert never truly sleeps," Eagle Feather explained. "It waits, patient as stone, for these moments of renewal." They made good progress throughout the afternoon. By evening, Eagle Feather pointed to a distant mesa outlined against the setting sun. "Beyond that lies the trading post. We will reach it by midday tomorrow." That night, as they camped beneath a solitary juniper tree, Sarah noticed a subtle shift in Eagle Feather's demeanor, a growing tension in his shoulders, a watchfulness beyond his usual vigilance. "Is something wrong?" she asked when the girls had retired. Eagle Feather hesitated before answering. "We are approaching the boundary between worlds. My reception among my mother's people has not always been welcoming. My father's blood makes me suspect in some eyes. You're concerned about how they'll receive us," Sarah realized. "The trading post deals with white settlers regularly," he assured her. "But bringing you directly after the Apache attack, some will question my judgment." "We could find another way," Sarah offered, though she knew their options were limited. Eagle Feather shook his head. "This is still the safest path for you. I merely want you prepared. Stay close tomorrow. Let me speak first." The following morning brought clear skies and warming temperatures, perfect traveling conditions. They departed early, following a faint trail that wound through a landscape of twisted junipers and volcanic rock formations. By mid-morning, they detected the first signs of human presence, a carefully stacked pile of stones marking a boundary, then brief glimpses of distant shepherds with flocks of sheep and goats on the hillsides. "We are on Navajo land now," Eagle Feather informed them. "Those men have already seen us. Word will reach the trading post before we arrive." As predicted, they approached the mesa by midday. The trading post occupied a natural alcove at its base, a collection of log structures and traditional hogans arranged around a central courtyard. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and horses grazed in a nearby corral. Before they could approach, 6 mounted warriors appeared from behind a rocky outcropping, forming a barrier across their path. The leader, a powerfully built man with silver streaking his black hair, addressed Eagle Feather sharply in the Navajo language. Sarah felt her daughters press closer to her as the tense exchange continued. Though she couldn't understand the words, the confrontational tone was unmistakable. Eagle Feather remained composed, responding with quiet dignity despite the other man's increasing agitation. Finally, the leader turned his attention to Sarah, switching to heavily accented English. "I am Swift River, headman of this post. Why do you bring these whites here, James Eagle Feather? Apache raid white wagons 3 days ago, many dead. Some say you were there." "I was," Eagle Feather confirmed. "These 5 survived. The mother protected her daughters when all others perished. I could not leave them to die." Swift River's dark eyes assessed Sarah with open suspicion. "And you trust this half-blood to guide you, white woman?" Sarah straightened her spine, meeting his gaze directly. "With my life and my daughters' lives, he has shown us nothing but honor and kindness when he could have left us to die." An older woman emerged from the largest hogan, her silver hair bound in a traditional knot, her face deeply lined by sun and time. She approached with unhurried dignity, studying the Mitchell women with piercing eyes. "These children have known hunger and fear," she stated, rather than asked, her English flowing more smoothly than Swift River's. "The small one has been sick." "Yes, grandmother," Eagle Feather confirmed respectfully. "I used the medicine you taught me for her fever." The old woman nodded once, then turned to Swift River. "They will stay in my dwelling tonight. The trading can be discussed after they have rested and eaten." Swift River frowned but offered no argument. The old woman, whom Eagle Feather later identified as Morning Sky, a respected elder and healer, led the Mitchells to her home, a spacious hogan with a central fire pit and neatly arranged sleeping platforms around its circular perimeter. "My grandson has a good heart," she told Sarah, as she served them a hearty stew of corn, beans, and rabbit. "But the path between our worlds is dangerous for those with feet in both." "Your grandson?" Sarah asked, surprised. Morning Sky's weathered face softened slightly. "My daughter was his mother. She chose a white trader against my counsel, but he proved a better man than most. James carries both their spirits." Throughout the afternoon, the Mitchell girls gradually relaxed under Morning Sky's grandmotherly attention. She showed Anne how to grind corn using a traditional stone metate, helped Catherine identify medicinal plants growing near the hogan, and delighted Lillian with stories of Coyote, the trickster figure in Navajo mythology. Even Elizabeth, initially the most wary, found herself assisting the elder with weaving preparations, learning the patterns that would eventually become a blanket. Meanwhile, Eagle Feather conferred with Swift River and other community leaders in the trading post's main building. Through the open doorway, Sarah occasionally glimpsed their serious expressions and animated gestures. The fate of her family, she realized, was being debated by people whose language she didn't understand, whose customs remained mysterious. As sunset approached, Eagle Feather finally emerged from the discussion. He found Sarah sitting outside Morning Sky's hogan, watching Lillian play with several Navajo children who had overcome their initial shyness. "They have agreed to help," he told her without preamble. "A supply wagon leaves for Santa Fe in 2 days. The trader who owns it will take you for a price." "What price?" Sarah asked cautiously. "We lost everything in the attack." Eagle Feather's expression remained neutral. "I have arranged payment." Before Sarah could press for details, Morning Sky called them for the evening meal. Inside the hogan, the atmosphere had transformed. Swift River and several other community members joined them, the earlier hostility replaced by cautious civility. A young man brought out a guitar, a European instrument adapted to native music, and played soft melodies as they ate. After dinner, Swift River addressed Sarah directly. "Eagle Feather tells us you seek your brother's home in Prescott Territory." "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "Daniel Mitchell. He has a homestead north of the town." Swift River nodded. "We know this place. Many whites settle there now." He exchanged glances, with morning sky before continuing. The trader Wilson will take you to Santa Fe. From there, the army sends regular patrols to Prescott. You can arrange passage. Thank you, Sarah said sincerely. Your help means everything to us. It is not given without condition, Swift River cautioned. What happened at Shadow Rock Canyon will bring soldiers. They will ask questions, seek vengeance. When you reach Santa Fe, what will you tell them? About Eagle Feather. The question hung in the air, weighted with implications Sarah immediately understood. The military would want someone to blame for the massacre. To many white authorities, one Native American looked much like another. Eagle Feather's presence near the attack could easily be misinterpreted or deliberately misconstrued by those seeking any excuse for retaliation. I will tell them the truth, Sarah stated firmly, that the Apache were responsible for the attack, and that a Navajo man named James Eagle Feather saved our lives at great personal risk. Without him, 5 more graves would have been dug at Shadow Rock Canyon. Swift River studied her intently, searching for any hint of deception. Finding none, he nodded once. Then we have understanding. Later that night, after the visitors had departed and her daughters slept soundly for the first time in days, Sarah slipped outside to clear her thoughts. The trading post was peaceful under the vast canopy of stars, most dwellings dark, except for the main building, where a lamp still burned. She found Eagle Feather sitting alone outside, carving a small piece of wood with his hunting knife. Without speaking, Sarah sat beside him on the rough-hewn bench. "What did you trade for our passage to Santa Fe?" she asked after a comfortable silence. Eagle Feather's hand stilled. "It doesn't matter." "It matters to me," Sarah insisted gently. He sighed, setting aside his carving. "My father's gold watch and my horse," Sarah's breath caught. "James, no, those are your only valuables." "They are just things," he echoed his earlier words to her. "Your lives are worth more. Why would you make such a sacrifice for strangers?" Sarah pressed, needing to understand. Eagle Feather turned to face her directly, his dark eyes reflecting starlight. "Are we still strangers, Sarah Mitchell?" The question penetrated her carefully maintained composure. No, they weren't strangers anymore. In the space of 4 days, this man had transformed from a mysterious observer to their rescuer, their guide, and now something else she couldn't quite define. "No," she admitted softly, "not strangers. But I still don't understand why you would give up so much." Eagle Feather resumed his carving, the knife moving in sure, practiced strokes. "When my wife and daughter died, I thought nothing remained for me in this world. I existed without purpose. Then I found 5 lives I could save." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Perhaps in saving you, I also saved myself." Sarah watched. His hands shaped the wood, gradually revealing the form of a small horse. She recognized it as a gift for Lillian, who had been admiring the painted ponies in the trading post corral. "What will you do after we reach Santa Fe?" she asked. "Return here, continue as before." He shrugged slightly. "My grandmother needs me, especially now that her sight dims with age. Will you ever visit the white settlements again?" The question emerged before Sarah could reconsider its implications. Eagle Feather glanced at her, something unspoken passing between them. Perhaps, if there was reason enough. The moment stretched between them, filled with possibilities neither dared articulate. Finally, Eagle Feather handed her the finished carving, a perfect miniature horse, its lines flowing and graceful despite the simplicity of his tools. "For Lillian," he said, "to remember her journey." "She won't need a carving to remember you," Sarah replied softly. "None of us will." She returned to Morning Sky's Hogan with the wooden horse clutched in her hand, her thoughts in turmoil. Tomorrow they would prepare for the journey to Santa Fe, another step toward the security she had sought for her daughters. Yet for the first time since leaving Maryland, Sarah found herself reluctant to continue their westward journey. As she settled onto her sleeping mat, Sarah acknowledged the truth she had been avoiding. In the midst of tragedy and survival, she had formed a connection she never expected with a man whose world was separated from hers by boundaries far more imposing than mere distance. Two paths diverged before her, forward to her brother-in-law's homestead and the promise of conventional security, or into uncharted territory, where nothing was certain except the pull of a connection she couldn't explain but couldn't deny. Morning would bring practical concerns and preparations for their journey. But tonight, beneath a shared canopy of stars, Sarah allowed herself to wonder about roads not taken and the cost of crossing boundaries, both seen and unseen. Dawn at the trading post brought a flurry of activity. Wilson, the trader who would take the Mitchells to Santa Fe, arrived with his wagon, a sturdy vehicle drawn by 4 mules and loaded with wool blankets, silver jewelry, and tanned hides bound for eastern markets. A burly man with a sun-reddened face partially hidden beneath a graying beard, he inspected his new passengers with business-like efficiency. 2 days to Santa Fe if the weather holds, he informed Sarah. You and the little one can ride in the wagon. The older girls will need to walk alongside. We're accustomed to walking, Elizabeth assured him, her protective instincts flaring. At his brisk manner, Wilson nodded curtly. We leave in 2 hours. Be ready. As the Mitchells gathered their meager possessions, Morning Sky appeared with bundles of food and several tightly woven blankets. The nights are cold on the mesa, she explained, pressing the gifts into Sarah's hands. These will keep your daughters warm. Your generosity overwhelms me, Sarah said sincerely. How can I repay such kindness? The elder woman's weathered face softened. By remembering that goodness exists in all peoples, even when the world tells you otherwise. She glanced meaningfully toward Eagle Feather, who was helping Wilson secure cargo in the wagon. My grandson walks between worlds, belonging fully to neither. It is a lonely path. Sarah followed her gaze. He's an extraordinary man. Yes, Morning Sky agreed, like his father before him. She studied Sarah with perceptive eyes. The journey ahead has many branches, daughter of the East. Choose your path with both heart and mind. Before Sarah could respond to this cryptic advice, Lillian rushed over, clutching the wooden horse Eagle Feather had carved. Grandmother Morning Sky, look what Mr. Eagle Feather made for me. The elder smiled, running, her fingers over the carving. He has his father's skill with a knife. Samuel Feather could make wood speak. She knelt to Lillian's level. This is a special gift. The horse spirit brings freedom and carries prayers between earth and sky. Lillian nodded solemnly. I'll keep it forever. As departure time approached, Swift River presented Sarah with a small pouch of coffee beans and dried meat. For the journey, he explained, his earlier suspicion replaced by grudging respect. Wilson knows the safe routes, but watch the sky. Storms come quickly this season. Thank you for sheltering us, Sarah replied. Your people have shown us kindness when we needed it most. Swift River's expression remained impassive. Eagle Feather vouched for you. His word carries weight, despite... He left the sentence unfinished, but Sarah understood the implications. Despite his mixed blood, despite the prejudices that existed on both sides of the cultural divide. I won't forget what he did for us, she assured him. What all of you have done. As Wilson made final preparations, Eagle Feather approached Sarah and her daughters. He carried a bundle wrapped in soft deerskin. For your journey, he said, presenting it to Sarah. And for what comes after. She unwrapped the package to find a beautifully crafted knife with a bone handle and a leather sheath decorated with intricate beadwork. James, I can't accept this. You've given too much already. The knife was my father's, he explained. White woman alone needs protection. The blade will serve you well if you respect its power." The gift's significance wasn't lost on Sarah. This wasn't merely a tool, but a symbol of trust, an heirloom passed to her safekeeping. "I'll treasure it," she promised, securing the sheath to her belt. Elizabeth stepped forward, extending her hand formally. "Thank you, Mr. Eagle Feather. We wouldn't have survived without you." Eagle Feather clasped her hand in the white man's customary greeting, honoring her emerging adulthood. "You have your mother's strength, Elizabeth Mitchell. Remember it when challenges come." Catherine, typically reserved with strangers, surprised everyone by impulsively embracing him. "I'll practice identifying the healing plants you showed me," she promised. Anne presented him with a small sketch she'd made of the trading post, her artistic talent capturing the settlement's unique character with remarkable accuracy. "So you won't forget us," she explained shyly. "Impossible," Eagle Feather assured her, carefully tucking the drawing into his shirt. Lillian, holding back tears, clutched her wooden horse. "Will we ever see you again?" Eagle Feather knelt to her level. "The future is unwritten, little one, but I will think of you when the stars appear each night." Finally, he turned to Sarah. Their eyes met, holding a conversation too complex for words. All the unspoken possibilities, the paths not taken, the boundaries uncrossed, everything hovered between them in that momentary silence. "Safe journey, Sarah Mitchell," he said simply. "Thank you for our lives," she responded, her voice steady. Despite the emotion tightening her throat, Wilson called impatiently from the wagon. "Daylight's wasting. We need to make 10-Mile Creek by nightfall." With final embraces for morning sky and reluctant waves to the gathered community members, the Mitchell family climbed aboard Wilson's wagon. As they departed, Sarah looked back to see Eagle Feather standing beside his grandmother, his tall figure gradually diminishing with distance, but remaining visible long after the trading post had faded from view. The journey to Santa Fe proceeded much as Wilson had predicted. They traveled steadily throughout the day, stopping only briefly to rest the mules and take simple meals of jerky and hardtack. The trader proved knowledgeable if uncommunicative, choosing routes that avoided the worst terrain while remaining vigilant for any sign of threat. By nightfall, they reached a small creek where several cottonwood trees provided natural shelter. Wilson efficiently established camp, building a small fire and preparing a more substantial meal of beans and salt pork. Though not unfriendly, he maintained a professional distance, clearly viewing the Mitchells as cargo rather than companions. As they settled around the fire, Catherine broached the subject they'd all been avoiding. "Do you travel often between the Navajo lands and Santa Fe, Mr. Wilson?" The trader nodded, stoking the fire. "Every few weeks, trade goods out, native crafts back. Been doing this route for 15 years. "Then you must know James Eagle Feather." "Well," she continued cautiously. Wilson's expression shifted subtly. "Known him since he was a boy, running around his father's trading post. Sam Feather was a good man, fair trader, respected by whites and Navajo alike." He poked at the fire. "The son inherited his father's decency, though it's done him few favors." "What do you mean?" Elizabeth asked. Wilson sighed, glancing at Sarah as if assessing how frank he should be. "Mixed blood's a heavy burden in these territories. Whites don't trust him because he's half Navajo. Some Navajo don't accept him because of his white father, man without a country, so to speak." "Yet he risked everything to help us," Sarah observed. "That's his father in him," Wilson replied. "Sam Feather never could ignore folks in trouble, even when helping brought him grief." He studied Sarah with newfound interest. "Eagle Feather trading his father's watch and his horse for your passage. That's significant. Those were his only connections to his past." Sarah felt her daughter's eyes upon her, questions forming that she wasn't prepared to answer. "We're grateful for his sacrifice," she said simply. Wilson seemed about to comment further, but instead turned the conversation to practical matters. Santa Fe's grown considerably since the railroad came through. Army maintains a strong presence. You'll want to report the massacre immediately. They'll investigate, maybe send an escort when you're ready to continue to Prescott. Later, as her daughters slept beneath morning sky's blankets, Sarah sat alone by the dying fire. The knife eagle feather had given her rested heavily against her hip, a tangible reminder of the man who had saved them. A man walking between worlds, belonging fully to neither, as his grandmother had described. For the first time since the attack, Sarah allowed herself to fully consider her situation. Her dreams of a secure future on her brother-in-law's homestead remained viable. Daniel would welcome them, help them establish a new life. The practical path forward was clear, yet something had shifted within her during those days of danger and survival. She had discovered reserves of strength and independence she hadn't known she possessed. The woman who had left Maryland seeking security was not the same woman now contemplating her future beneath a New Mexico sky. And then there was Eagle Feather, a man whose quiet dignity and profound integrity had affected her in ways she couldn't easily dismiss. Their connection had formed amid crisis, yet it felt more substantial than mere gratitude. What might have developed between them under different circumstances? What might still develop if she chose an unexpected path? Sarah touched the knife at her belt, remembering Eagle Feather's words, "A white woman alone needs protection." But she wasn't entirely alone. She had her daughters, whose resilience through their ordeal had astonished her. Perhaps they were stronger together than she had realized. When sleep finally claimed her, Sarah's dreams were filled with diverging trails and choices hovering just beyond her reach. They arrived in Santa Fe late the following afternoon. The territorial capital bustled with activity. Merchants hawking goods from crowded stalls, soldiers in blue uniforms patrolling the streets, wagon trains preparing for journeys east and west. After the isolation of their journey, the noise and crowds felt overwhelming to the Mitchell women. Wilson guided them directly to the military headquarters, a sturdy adobe building flying the American flag. "Captain Ramos is a fair man," he told Sarah. "He'll want a full account of the massacre. Tell him everything." He hesitated. But, Sarah prompted, "just remember that Army officers sometimes paint all natives with the same brush," Wilson cautioned. "Be clear about who helped you and who didn't." Inside, they were received by Captain Michael Ramos, a trim officer whose youthful face contrasted with eyes that had witnessed too much frontier violence. He listened intently as Sarah recounted the Apache attack, the death of their fellow travelers, and their rescue by James Eagle Feather. "You're extraordinarily fortunate, Mrs. Mitchell," Ramos commented when she finished. "Few survive such encounters." "It wasn't fortune, Captain," Sarah corrected firmly. "It was the courage and kindness of a man who risked his own safety to save us." Ramos nodded, making notes in a leather-bound ledger. "We've heard reports of Apache raiding parties targeting wagon trains. This fits their pattern." He looked up. "You're certain it was Apache, not Navajo or Comanche?" "Absolutely certain," Sarah stated, remembering her promise to Swift River. "The Navajo at the trading post treated us with nothing but kindness. Without James Eagle Feather and his people, we wouldn't have survived." The captain studied her thoughtfully. "Your account will be officially recorded. We'll dispatch a patrol to Shadow Rock Canyon to assess the situation and recover any remains for proper burial." He closed his ledger. "As for your immediate needs, there's a boarding house run by Mrs. Caldwell that accepts women in difficult circumstances. I'll arrange accommodation for you and your daughters until you decide your next steps." "Thank you, Captain," Sarah replied. "I also need to send word to my brother-in-law in Prescott, Daniel Mitchell. He's expecting us. Of course, the military courier leaves for Arizona Territory twice weekly. I'll ensure your message is included." Ramos hesitated. "Mrs. Mitchell, If you're still intent on reaching Prescott, the Army sends supply wagons that route monthly. The next one departs in 2 weeks. It would be the safest option for your family. 2 weeks. Sarah repeated the time frame mentally, an unexpected wave of relief washing over her. 2 weeks to rest, to recover, to decide. Mrs. Caldwell's boarding house proved a sanctuary after their ordeal. The motherly widow provided clean rooms, regular meals, and practical assistance acquiring essential supplies. Within days, the Mitchell women had new clothing, proper baths, and the beginning of routine after weeks of uncertainty. The boarding house's other residents, mostly wives of soldiers stationed at distant outposts or women awaiting transportation to homesteads farther west, welcomed them with frontier hospitality. Their shared circumstances created instant camaraderie, and Sarah found unexpected comfort in these female friendships after so much isolation. Elizabeth quickly assumed a role, helping Mrs. Caldwell manage the boarding house operations, her natural leadership blossoming in this structured environment. Catherine discovered Santa Fe's apothecary shop and spent hours discussing medicinal plants with its elderly proprietor, comparing his knowledge with what she'd learned from Eagle Feather. Anne sketched the adobe buildings and vibrant market scenes, while Lillian charmed everyone with her resilience and the wooden horse she proudly displayed to anyone who showed interest. A week into their stay, Sarah received a reply from her brother-in-law. Daniel expressed horror at their ordeal and profound relief at their survival. His letter urged them to continue to Prescott as soon as practical, promising a home and security upon their arrival. "We still have a week before the Army supply wagon departs," Elizabeth noted as they discussed the letter over breakfast. "Time enough to prepare properly." "Yes," Sarah agreed absently, her thoughts elsewhere. Later that day, as they walked through Santa Fe's central plaza, Lillian tugged at Sarah's sleeve. "Mother, will Mr. Eagle Feather ever visit us in Prescott?" The innocent question crystallized the uncertainty that had been growing in Sarah's mind. "I don't know, sweetheart. His home is with his people." "But we're his people too, aren't we?" Lillian persisted with a child's simple logic. "He saved us. That makes us family." Out of the mouths of babes, Sarah thought. She had no answer that would satisfy her youngest daughter or herself. That evening, after her daughters had retired, Sarah sat alone in Mrs. Caldwell's small garden. The knife Eagle Feather had given her lay across her lap, its bone handle smooth beneath her fingers. The choices before her seemed simultaneously clear and impossibly complex. "Trouble sleeping?" Mrs. Caldwell asked, joining her on the bench. The older woman had proved remarkably perceptive during their stay, offering guidance without intrusion. "Troubled thinking," Sarah admitted. Mrs. Caldwell nodded knowingly. "You've been through more than most could bear. Yet here you sit, strong enough to worry about choices rather than mere survival. That's a victory of sorts." "I suppose it is," Sarah agreed. "But the path forward isn't as clear as I once thought." "Paths rarely are out here," Mrs. Caldwell observed. "The maps show routes between settlements, but they can't tell you which journey your heart needs to take." Sarah glanced at her sharply. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who stood at similar crossroads," the older woman replied with a gentle smile. "My William was a cavalry officer when we met. My Boston family was scandalized when I chose a life that didn't include proper drawing rooms and calling. Cards." She gazed up at the star-filled sky. 30 years of frontier life, hard years, many of them, and never once did I regret choosing love over convention." "It's not that simple," Sarah protested weakly. "No, it never is," Mrs. Caldwell agreed, "especially with 4 daughters to consider. But children are remarkably adaptable and stronger than we often give them credit for." She patted Sarah's hand before rising. "Whatever you decide, make the choice that lets you sleep peacefully when you're my age." Alone again, Sarah weighed her options with new clarity. The practical choice, continuing to Prescott, offered security and conventional acceptance. Her daughters would have a proper home, educational opportunities, and the protection of family connections. It was the safe choice, the expected choice. The alternative meant embracing uncertainty. Returning to the trading post and Eagle Feather would mean navigating cultural boundaries few white women dared cross. It would mean potential ostracism from her own society and lingering suspicion from his. It would mean building something entirely new from the ashes of her former life. Yet when she imagined that path, uncertain as it was, she felt something she hadn't experienced since Thomas died. Possibility. Not merely security or survival, but the chance for genuine connection, for a life defined by courage rather than convention. As the first light of dawn touched the eastern horizon, Sarah reached a decision. Whether wisdom or folly, she couldn't yet say. But for the first time since leaving Maryland, the path ahead felt true to the woman she had become. "I've made a decision," Sarah announced the following morning as her daughters gathered for breakfast. In Mrs. Caldwell's dining room, the quiet determination in her voice drew their immediate attention. Elizabeth, always the most perceptive, set down her coffee cup. "You're not planning to continue to Uncle Daniel's, are you?" Sarah took a deep breath. "No, at least not immediately." A mixture of emotions crossed her daughters' faces. Surprise, confusion, and in Lillian's case, unmistakable hope. "We're going back to the trading post," Sarah continued, "to Eagle Feather." Silence greeted her declaration, each girl processing this unexpected announcement according to her nature. Catherine, practical as always, was the first to respond. "How will we get there? Wilson has already departed for his next trading run." "Captain Ramos mentioned a missionary group heading toward Navajo territory tomorrow," Sarah explained. "Reverend Phillips and his wife are establishing a school near the eastern reservation boundary. They've agreed to take us as far as Five Pines Crossing. From there, we can hire a guide to the trading post." "Does this mean—" Anne hesitated, glancing at her sisters. "Are we going to live with the Navajo?" "Not exactly," Sarah replied, "but I need to speak with Eagle Feather before making permanent plans. He sacrificed his most valuable possessions to secure our passage to Santa Fe. At minimum, we owe him the opportunity to reclaim his property." This wasn't the full truth, and Elizabeth's raised eyebrows suggested she recognized the omission. But Sarah wasn't prepared to articulate emotions she herself was still reconciling. "What about Uncle Daniel?" Elizabeth asked. "He's expecting us." "I've written explaining our delay," Sarah assured her. "We're not abandoning that option entirely. We're simply exploring alternatives." Lillian clutched her wooden horse, her small face illuminated with joy. "We'll see Mr. Eagle Feather again, and Grandmother Morning Sky." "Yes, sweetheart," Sarah confirmed, her resolve strengthening at her youngest daughter's evident happiness. "Well," Catherine said pragmatically, "I did want to learn more about those medicinal plants Morning Sky was showing me." Anne nodded slowly. "I have so many sketches I wanted to finish at the trading post." All eyes turned to Elizabeth, whose opinion carried significant weight among the sisters. The eldest Mitchell daughter maintained a thoughtful silence, studying her mother with an intensity that belied her 15 years. "This isn't just about repaying a debt, is it?" she finally asked. Sarah met her daughter's gaze directly. "No, it isn't." Elizabeth nodded, seemingly satisfied with this honest admission. "Then I support your decision, Mother. We all should." The matter settled with surprising ease. They spent the day preparing for departure. Mrs. Caldwell, though clearly surprised by Sarah's choice, provided practical assistance without judgment. "The frontier makes unconventional women of us all," she remarked as she helped Sarah pack. "Your James Eagle Feather seems an exceptional man from everything you've told me." "He is," Sarah acknowledged, "though I'm not certain what he'll make of our return." Only one way to find out, Mrs. Caldwell said with a knowing smile. Courage doesn't always roar, my dear. Sometimes it's the quiet voice saying, "I'll try again tomorrow." Captain Ramos proved less understanding when Sarah informed him of their change in plans. "Mrs. Mitchell, I strongly advise against this course of action," he cautioned, his official demeanor slipping to reveal genuine concern. "The territories between here and the Navajo lands are unpredictable. The massacre you survived wasn't an isolated incident." "I appreciate your concern, Captain," Sarah replied firmly, "but Reverend Phillips assures me they travel this route regularly without incident." Ramos frowned. "Missionaries are afforded certain considerations by the tribes. Civilian women and children without military escort are viewed differently." He sighed, recognizing her determination. "At least allow me to provide you with additional ammunition for your revolver, and I insist you accept this letter of safe passage should you encounter any military patrols." The following dawn found the Mitchell family joining Reverend Phillips's modest caravan. The missionary and his wife, earnest, educationally minded Bostonians, welcomed them warmly, though with evident curiosity about their unusual destination. The Navajo are remarkably receptive to educational initiatives, Reverend Phillips explained as their wagons creaked westward. Unlike some tribes, they recognize the value of incorporating certain aspects of our culture while maintaining their own traditions. Mrs. Phillips, a former schoolteacher with kind eyes and practical hands, took an immediate liking to the Mitchell girls. "You've raised remarkable daughters, Mrs. Mitchell. Such resilience after all you've endured." "They've surprised even me," Sarah admitted, watching Elizabeth help the wagon driver negotiate a difficult stretch of road while Catherine engaged the missionary's assistant in a detailed discussion of native botany. "Sometimes I think children reveal their true nature during hardship rather than ease." "A profound observation," Mrs. Phillips agreed. "And what of this James Eagle Feather? Reverend Phillips mentioned he's of mixed heritage." "Yes," Sarah confirmed, uncertain how much to reveal about their relationship. "His father was a respected trader, his mother Navajo. He bridges both worlds with remarkable grace despite the challenges." "Such individuals are invaluable to our work," Mrs. Phillips noted. "Perhaps he might consider assisting at our school. We could offer fair compensation." Sarah smiled non-committally, recognizing the well-intentioned but presumptuous nature of the suggestion. Eagle Feather's path was his to determine, not hers to negotiate. The journey to Five Pines Crossing proceeded without incident. True to Captain Ramos's assessment, the missionaries' wagons received respectful distance from the occasional native hunting parties they encountered. On the third day, they arrived at the small settlement that marked the boundary between territories, little more than a trading post, a livery stable, and a few scattered homesteads. "This is where we must part ways," Reverend Phillips announced. "We continue north from here, while your destination lies westward." The missionary provided Sarah with a letter of introduction to Five Pines Trading Post's proprietor, who could arrange their final transportation. His wife embraced each Mitchell, daughter warmly, extracting promises of letters detailing their adventures. "Your path is unconventional," Mrs. Phillips whispered to Sarah during their farewell, "but I sense it's right for you. Trust that instinct." Five Pines Trading Post proved considerably rougher than Santa Fe's civilized establishments. A weathered log structure perched on the banks of a seasonal creek, serving trappers, prospectors, and the occasional government surveyor. Its proprietor, Jeremiah Collins, greeted Sarah's request with undisguised skepticism. "You want passage to Swift River's trading post," he repeated incredulously. "Ma'am, that's 3 days through territory most white folks avoid deliberately." "We've traveled there before," Sarah stated firmly, "and we have friends among the Navajo." Collins raised bushy eyebrows. "Friends, is it? Well, that's a first." He studied the Mitchell women thoughtfully. "I've got a supply wagon heading that direction in 2 days. Driver's a half Cheyenne named Red Fox who knows those trails better than most. He can take you, but it'll cost." Sarah produced the funds Mrs. Caldwell had discreetly pressed upon her at their parting. "Will this suffice?" Collins counted the money with practiced efficiency. "It'll do. Wagon leaves at first light day after tomorrow. I can offer basic accommodations. Until then, nothing fancy, mind you. Their quarters, a small back room with straw-filled mattresses, were indeed rudimentary compared to Mrs. Caldwell's comfortable boarding house. But after their experiences at Shadow Rock Canyon, the Mitchell women found little cause for complaint. They spent the intervening day restocking supplies and gathering information about conditions ahead. "Unusual drought this season," reported Red Fox, the taciturn driver who would guide their final leg. His weathered face and silver-streaked hair suggested a man well acquainted with frontier hardships. "Might need to take the northern route if the usual waterholes are dry." "Will that delay us significantly?" Sarah asked. Red Fox shrugged. "Day, maybe 2. Better than dying of thirst." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Begging your pardon, ma'am, but Collins mentioned you're heading to Swift River's post on account of friends. Would one of those friends happen to be James Eagle Feather?" Sarah tensed. "You know him." "Known him since he was knee-high to a grasshopper," Red Fox replied, his expression softening. "His father pulled me through a nasty fever when no one else would touch a breed. Good folks, the Feathers." He nodded decisively. "We'll get you there safe. Any friend of Eagle Feather is worth the extra effort." They departed as promised at dawn, Red Fox's wagon loaded with trade goods. The girls, having developed considerable stamina during their ordeal, alternated between riding and walking alongside. As the landscape gradually shifted from scattered pine forests to the open expanses of the high desert, Sarah found her anticipation growing. What would Eagle Feather think of their return? What expectations had she created with this impulsive decision? The practical concerns she'd temporarily shelved in Santa Fe resurfaced with mounting urgency. On their second night, camped beneath a natural rock formation that provided shelter. From the wind, Sarah confided her uncertainties to Elizabeth. "Have I made a terrible mistake?" she whispered, as they sat apart from the others. "Dragging you girls back into this wilderness based on feelings I can barely define?" Elizabeth, who had inherited her father's thoughtful nature alongside her mother's determination, considered the question seriously. "Do you remember what Father used to say about crossroads?" she finally asked. Sarah smiled at the unexpected reference. "That the path that frightens you most is usually the one you need to take." "Exactly," Elizabeth confirmed. "Uncle Daniel and Prescott represent safety and convention. Eagle Feather and the Navajo lands represent uncertainty, but also possibility." She took her mother's hand. "You taught us courage during the massacre and its aftermath. Now you're teaching us to honor our hearts alongside our heads. That's not a mistake." The wisdom in her daughter's response brought tears to Sarah's eyes. When had Elizabeth transformed from a child into this insightful young woman? "When did you become so wise?" she asked softly. Elizabeth smiled. "Probably around the time you pulled me under that overturned wagon and showed me how to survive impossible odds." Their journey's final day brought them through increasingly familiar territory. Lillian recognized landmarks from their previous passage, excitedly pointing out the mesa where Swift River's trading post nestled. By late afternoon, Red Fox confirmed they would reach their destination before nightfall. "Looks like you've got a welcoming committee," he observed, as they crested the final ridge overlooking the settlement. A small group had gathered in the central courtyard, alerted to their approach by the distant dust of their wagon. Sarah's heart raced as she strained to identify the figures below. She recognized Swift River's distinctive silver-streaked hair and Morning Sky's dignified posture, but her eyes searched for one figure in particular. "Is he there?" Catherine asked, echoing her mother's unspoken question. "I can't tell." Sarah admitted, her voice uncharacteristically uncertain. As they approached the final bend in the trail, a lone rider appeared from a side canyon, moving rapidly. To intercept their wagon, Sarah recognized Eagle Feather's distinctive painted mare, the same horse he had traded for their passage to Santa Fe. "He got his horse back," Lillian exclaimed joyfully. Red Fox slowed the wagon as Eagle Feather approached. For a moment he seemed unable to believe the evidence before his eyes. Then his normally impassive expression transformed into undisguised wonder. "Sarah Mitchell," he said, her name itself a question. "James Eagle Feather," she replied, a smile breaking through her nervousness. He guided his horse alongside the wagon, studying each Mitchell face as if confirming a dream's reality. "You've returned, all of you." "We have unfinished business," Sarah explained, suddenly conscious of Red Fox's curious observation and her daughter's attentive presence. Understanding flickered in Eagle Feather's eyes. "Indeed we do." He turned to Red Fox with newfound animation. "The trading post is prepared to receive your goods. Swift River mentioned you bring the medicine shipment." "That and more," Red Fox confirmed, grinning, "including some unexpected passengers." Eagle Feather rode ahead to announce their arrival, his straight-backed posture radiating an energy Sarah hadn't witnessed during their previous encounter. By the time their wagon reached the settlement, the entire community had assembled to greet them. Morning Sky stepped forward, her weathered face creasing with genuine pleasure. "The Mitchell women returned to us," she announced in English for their benefit. "Our circle is completed." Swift River, though more reserved, inclined his head respectfully. "You honor us with your trust, Sarah Mitchell. Few white women choose our company when safer paths exist." "Safety isn't always measured by familiar surroundings," Sarah replied, the words coming naturally despite her careful rehearsal of this moment. "Sometimes it's found in the character of those who stand beside you." Her gaze shifted to Eagle Feather, who stood slightly apart, his eyes never leaving her face. The connection between them, tentative during their first encounter, had strengthened, in absence, like metal tempered by fire. 1 year later, the homestead at White Dove Creek bore little resemblance to the abandoned structure Sarah had first glimpsed 12 months earlier. What had been a weathered shell of Samuel Feather's original trading post now stood renewed, its log walls reinforced, its roof sound, its surroundings transformed from neglect to purposeful industry. Sarah paused in hanging freshly laundered linens to observe the activity around her. Near the corral, Eagle Feather and Elizabeth worked with a spirited young colt, their confident movements reflecting a partnership developed through months of shared labor. Catherine tended her meticulously organized herb garden, where traditional Navajo medicinal plants grew alongside Eastern varieties she'd ordered from Boston. Anne sat beneath a cottonwood tree, sketching a group of Navajo children while listening to Lillian's animated storytelling, the youngest Mitchell daughter now, switching effortlessly between English and Navajo phrases. A year ago, Sarah could never have imagined this life. Now she couldn't imagine any other. The sound of approaching horses drew her attention to the trail leading from Santa Fe. Daniel Mitchell appeared, accompanied by 2 young ranch hands and a wagon loaded with supplies. After months of correspondence, her brother-in-law had finally come to see the unconventional life his sister-in-law had chosen. "Sarah?" Daniel called, raising his hand in greeting. Though initially shocked by her decision not to continue to Prescott, his letters had gradually shifted from concern to grudging acceptance, especially after Elizabeth's careful descriptions of their thriving new life. "Daniel," Sarah replied warmly, moving to welcome him, "you're earlier than we expected." "The trail was clearer than I anticipated," he said, dismounting with the slight awkwardness of a man more accustomed to saddles than formal greetings. He glanced around, clearly surprised by the orderly prosperity of the homestead. "You've done well here." "We have," Sarah agreed simply. Eagle Feather approached, wiping his hands on a cloth after leaving Elizabeth with the horses. The two men sized each other up, Thomas Mitchell's brother and the man who now stood beside his widow. Whatever Daniel saw in Eagle Feather's steady gaze apparently satisfied him, for he extended his hand without hesitation. "My family owes you a debt we can never repay," Daniel said formally. Eagle Feather clasped his hand. "There are no debts between family." The significance of this acceptance wasn't lost on Sarah. The correspondence with Daniel had been difficult. At times, his initial letters expressing everything from concern for their safety to accusations of recklessness. That he now stood in their home, acknowledging their choice, represented a bridge between worlds she had once thought impossibly distant. That evening, as they gathered for dinner in the main room of the trading post, Sarah marveled at the unlikely assembly. Her 4 daughters, Eagle Feather, Morning Sky, who had come for the occasion, Daniel and his ranch hands, and Swift River, whose initial suspicion of their arrangement had gradually yielded to genuine respect. The trading post itself reflected their blended existence. Eagle Feather's Navajo carvings shared space with Thomas Mitchell's pocket watch on the mantel. Catherine's medical texts stood alongside traditional healing bundles Morning Sky had given her. Elizabeth's maps of trading routes covered one wall, while Anne's sketches of Navajo ceremonies adorned another. Their life had found a rhythm that honored both worlds. 3 times monthly, Eagle Feather traveled to Santa Fe with Navajo crafts, returning with goods from the East that benefited both cultures. Sarah managed the trading post's accounts and correspondence, her education finding unexpected application in this remote setting. The girls divided their learning between formal lessons Sarah insisted upon and the practical knowledge of the wilderness Eagle Feather and his people shared. It hadn't been easy. The first months had tested them all, rebuilding the trading post, establishing their unusual household, negotiating their place between cultures that historically viewed each other with suspicion. There had been moments of doubt, cultural misunderstandings, and the constant challenge of creating something without precedent. Their most significant breakthrough had come when Captain Ramos visited, ostensibly to follow up on the Shadow Rock Canyon massacre investigation, but clearly curious about the White Widow rumored to be living among the Navajo. His initial skepticism had gradually shifted to recognition of what they had accomplished, a small but meaningful bridge between communities typically separated by fear and prejudice. As the dinner conversation flowed around her, Sarah caught Eagle Feather watching her from across the table, a quiet contentment in his expression that mirrored her own. Neither could have foreseen this outcome that day in Shadow Rock Canyon when their eyes had met through the crack in a shattered wagon. Later, after their guests had retired and the girls slept soundly in their rooms, Sarah and Eagle Feather stood together on the porch, gazing at the star-filled sky. His arm rested comfortably around her shoulders, the formality of their early relationship long since replaced by the easy intimacy of shared purpose. "Your brother seems a good man," Eagle Feather observed. "He watches you to see if you're truly happy." "And what does he see?" Sarah asked, though she knew the answer. Eagle Feather smiled, the expression still rare enough to feel like a gift. A woman who followed her heart and found her true path, even when it led where no maps showed the way. Sarah leaned against him, grateful for his solid presence. "When I left Maryland, I thought I was simply seeking security for my daughters. I never imagined finding a new beginning for myself. Life's greatest journeys often lead to destinations we never knew we sought," Eagle Feather replied, his words echoing the wisdom of both his father's Bible and his mother's oral traditions. As they stood together beneath the vast canopy of stars, Sarah reflected on the unlikely path that had brought them here, a path marked by loss and violence, yet ultimately leading to renewal and connection. Their story had begun in massacre and desperation, but it would continue in hope and possibility, a testament to the human heart's capacity to find meaning beyond boundaries. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together, not as survivors of tragedy, but as creators of a shared future neither could have imagined alone. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.